James Webb looked past the nebula and found a shape that ate light. Not a planet, not a star. A ring of black towers linked by bridges, turning so slowly the universe seemed to hold its breath. We sent a hello into the dark, radio, laser, a clean, careful message. The reply came at once, not words, a picture. On every screen, our solar system drawn in cold lines. Mercury, Venus, Earth, the Sun. A thin black circle slid around the Sun like a target. No sound, no static, just that circle, steady and perfect, tightening as if a hand older than light were pressing it there. The room went quiet. Someone cut the transmission. It didn't matter. The image kept coming through muted speakers, through dead cables, bleeding into the metal of the floor. The circle began to pulse, slow, slower, until our chest straps synced to it. Heartbeats followed. Breath followed. Even the clock on the wall stalled and twitched. Then the last frame changed. The circle opened. Not a symbol, not a trick of light. An eye, black, lidless, filling the screen, looking past the nebula, past the stars, straight at us. We asked the universe a question. It didn't answer. It noticed. My name is Dr. Tommy Wakeford, and I died 3 weeks after that transmission. At least, that's what my death certificate says. The one they filed at Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, where I'd worked for the past 7 years analyzing deep space imagery from the Webb telescope. Cardiac arrest, they wrote. Stress-induced. Poor bastard couldn't handle the discovery. They're not entirely wrong. What they don't mention is that my heart stopped beating in sync with something 847 light-years away, or that the EKG machine in the hospital kept printing the same geometric pattern even after they unplugged it. They don't mention how my pupils dilated into perfect black circles that reflected stars that shouldn't exist. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The morning it all started, I was supposed to be reviewing routine atmospheric data from WASP 96b. Instead, I was nursing my third cup of coffee and scrolling through Jake Brennan's latest infrared composites from the Karina Nebula. Jake worked the night shift, a pale, twitchy guy with nicotine-stained fingers who'd rather talk to distant galaxies than people in the same room. He'd flagged something in Sector 7G, just beyond the nebula's southern edge. The metadata showed it was captured at 3:47 EST, but when I pulled up the raw files, the timestamp kept shifting. 3:47, 3:46, 3:45. Backwards. I should have called Dr. Hoffman immediately, should have followed protocol. Instead, I enhanced the image resolution and zoomed in. That's when I saw the ring, and that's when everything started going wrong. The first thing you need to understand about Goddard is that it never truly sleeps. Even at 4 in the morning, the hum of cooling systems and data processors creates this constant background static that gets into your bones. I'd grown used to it over the years, but that morning something felt different. The rhythm was off, like a heartbeat with an irregular murmur. Jake appeared at my workstation before I even called him over. He moved with that peculiar shuffle of someone who'd spent too many nights staring at screens, his Red Bull and cigarette breath hitting me as he leaned over my shoulder. "You see it too, don't you?" His voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. The thing that shouldn't be there. I minimized the image and swiveled around to face him. Jake's eyes were bloodshot, but not from fatigue. They had this intensity, like he'd been staring at something that stared back. "When did you first notice the timestamp anomaly?" I asked. 3 days ago, started as a minor glitch, maybe a second or two off, but it's been getting worse." He pulled up a chair, sitting close enough that I could smell the nervous sweat beneath his cologne. "Tommy, I've been running imaging algorithms for 6 years. I know what belongs out there and what doesn't." We'd worked together for months, but always maintained that professional distance. Something about the discovery was stripping away those barriers. "Show me everything," I said. Jake's fingers flew across his keyboard with practiced efficiency. Multiple windows cascaded across his monitor. Spectral analyses, infrared composites, radio telescope data from Arecibo before it collapsed. Each file told the same impossible story. "Here's the kicker," he said, pulling up a comparative timeline. "The structure, this ring thing, it's not just there. It's been there, retroactively." I checked archived data from Hubble, Spitzer, even ground-based observations from Mount Wilson. Nothing. But when I run the same coordinates through Webb's instruments now, they show it was always visible. My stomach tightened. That's not how physics works. Yeah, well, tell that to the universe. Jake lit another cigarette despite the no smoking policy, his hands trembling slightly. There's more. I've been tracking radio emissions from that sector. Very faint, but consistent. Want to hear something that'll really fuck with your head? He didn't wait for an answer, connecting his headphones to the audio interface. The sound that emerged was barely audible, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to synchronize with the facility's electrical hum. It started 3 days ago, same time as the timestamp issues. But here's where it gets weird. I recorded 8 hours of this signal, ran it through spectral analysis. The frequency is shifting. Slowly, but definitely shifting towards something. Toward what? Human cardiac rhythm, resting heart rate specifically. The cigarette smoke curled between us, and I found myself studying the sharp line of Jake's jaw, the way his lips moved when he talked about impossible things. There was something magnetic about his obsession, his willingness to chase theories that would get us both laughed out of academic conferences. We need to document this properly, I said, though my voice sounded hollow even to myself. Follow protocol, report to Hoffman. Jake's hand brushed mine as he reached for another file. The contact lingered longer than necessary. Tommy, look at this first. Really look at it. The new image filled my screen, a close-up of the ring structure's surface. What I'd initially taken for smooth black material revealed itself under enhanced resolution to be something else entirely. Geometric patterns covered every surface, intricate designs that seemed to shift and flow like living tissue. Jesus Christ, I breathed. It gets worse. Watch what happens when I adjust the gamma levels. The patterns began to move, not randomly, with purpose. They flowed in streams and spirals, converging at specific points along the ring's circumference. At the convergence points, something that looked disturbingly like neural pathways pulsed with faint bioluminescence. It's alive, Jake whispered. The whole damn thing is alive. My phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Hoffman. Emergency staff meeting. Conference room B. Now. Jake saw it too. Think someone else noticed. Or something noticed us. I stood up, my legs unsteady. Jake, I need you to copy everything to an external drive. All of it. And I need you to do it now. Why? The building's ventilation system hiccuped, and for just a moment the constant hum faltered. In that brief silence, I could swear I heard something else, a sound like breathing, slow and measured, coming from the walls themselves. Because I have a feeling we're about to be told to forget this ever happened. Jake nodded, his fingers already working on the file transfer. The external drive's LED blinked frantically as terabytes of data copied over. While he worked, I found myself staring at his profile in the monitor's glow, thinking about how 3 days ago we were strangers sharing the same building. And now we were conspirators sharing something that might redefine humanity's place in the universe. The drive finished copying just as footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. Tommy, Jake said, pocketing the drive, whatever happens in that meeting, don't let them separate us. Something tells me we're going to need each other. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the footsteps had stopped directly outside our door. Conference room B looked like a crime scene. Dr. Hoffman sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize, one in a dark suit that screamed federal agent, the other wearing military dress blues with enough ribbons to paper a small wall. 3 laptops were open, displaying what looked like our imaging data, but cleaned up, sanitized, stripped of anything that made it extraordinary. Jake slid into the seat next to me, close enough that his knee brushed mine under the table. The contact was reassuring and electric at the same time. Gentlemen, Hoffman began, his voice carrying that forced calm of someone delivering bad news. I'd like you to meet Agent Morrison from the Department of Energy and Colonel Briggs from the Air Force Office of Scientific Intelligence." Morrison leaned forward, his pale blue eyes fixing on me first, then Jake. "Dr. Wakeford, Mr. Brennan, we understand you've been analysing some unusual data from the Webb telescope's deep field observations." "Unusual is one word for it," Jake muttered. Colonel Briggs opened a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. "We're here to discuss the classification protocols for your recent findings. What you've discovered falls under several national security directives." "What we've discovered," I said carefully, "is an astronomical phenomenon that challenges our understanding of physics. The scientific community has a right to—" "The scientific community," Morrison interrupted, "doesn't need to know about every blip on our instruments, especially when those blips might cause widespread panic." Hoffman cleared his throat. "Tommy, Jake, what you've found is significant. Too significant. The decision has been made to restrict access to this data pending further analysis by specialized teams." I felt Jake tense beside me. "Specialized teams? You mean military teams?" "I mean teams equipped to handle discoveries that could destabilize global society," Colonel Briggs said. "We've seen this before. SETI protocols exist for a reason." That's when something clicked. You already knew what we'd find." The room went quiet. Morrison and Briggs exchanged a look that confirmed everything. 3 weeks ago, Morrison said slowly, we received a transmission. A response to standard deep space communication attempts made by various space agencies. The source was traced to coordinates in the Karina Nebula region. Jake's hand found mine under the table, squeezing hard enough to hurt. "What kind of response?" Colonel Briggs opened his laptop and rotated it toward us. The screen showed our solar system rendered in thin, clinical lines. A black circle moved around the sun like a targeting reticle. "The transmission lasted 47 minutes, Morrison continued. "It repeated the same image sequence, growing more detailed with each iteration. By the end, we could identify individual continents on Earth, major population centers, even some military installations." "Jesus," Jake breathed. "It gets worse," Hoffman said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely frightened. "The transmission didn't just come through our receivers, it manifested on screens throughout the facility, including systems that weren't connected to any network. Isolation protocols failed. The signals seemed to propagate through the building's electrical grid, even through unpowered devices." Morrison stood and began pacing. "We tried to establish a dialogue, send mathematical sequences, prime numbers, basic physics constants. Every attempt generated the same response, that targeting circle, growing more precise with each exchange." "Then it stopped," Colonel Briggs added. 72 hours of absolute silence, until 3 days ago when your instrument started picking up that structure." Jake leaned back in his chair. "So you think the ring is connected to the transmission?" "We think the transmission was a scanning protocol," Morrison replied, "and the ring is what was doing the scanning." The room's fluorescent lights flickered, and for a moment I could swear the shadows on the walls shifted into geometric patterns, the same flowing designs we'd seen on the structure's surface. "There's something else," Hoffman said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The transmission's final image sequence, before it cut out completely." He opened his own laptop, hesitating before hitting play. "I need you to understand that what you're about to see has been classified at the highest levels. The President has been briefed. NATO allies are being informed through back channels." The video file opened. Static filled the screen, then cleared to show our solar system again. But this time, the black circle around the sun began to change. It expanded, pulsed, then contracted into something else entirely. An eye. Massive, lidless, utterly alien. It stared out from the screen with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. Not the cold, analytical gaze of a machine, but something organic, ancient, and thoroughly aware. "The image persisted for exactly 60 seconds, Morrison said. Then every screen in the facility went dark. But here's what really concerns us. During those 60 seconds, every person who viewed the image experienced synchronized cardiac episodes. Heart rates dropped to 30 beats per minute, then slowly climbed back to normal. Jake's grip on my hand tightened, synchronized across how many people? 437 staff members, Colonel Briggs replied, including personnel in completely isolated sections of the building. EKG readings showed identical patterns across the entire facility. I felt something shift in my chest, a subtle change in rhythm that made me press my free hand against my ribs. What are you saying? That thing can influence human physiology from 800 light years away. We're saying, Morrison replied, that whatever's out there has capabilities we can't begin to comprehend, and it's paying attention to us now. The lights flickered again, longer this time. In the extended dimness, I saw Jake's face clearly, pale, frightened, but determined. Something passed between us in that moment, an understanding that we were in this together now, whatever this turned out to be. So, what's the play? Jake asked. Lock down the data and pretend it never happened. The data is already locked down, Colonel Briggs said. What we need from you is complete cooperation. No personal copies, no unauthorized communications, no speculation to colleagues or family members. And if we refuse? I asked. Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Dr. Wakeford, your security clearance gives you access to information that could compromise national security if mishandled. We're simply reminding you of existing obligations. Hoffman leaned forward. Tommy, Jake, I've worked with both of you long enough to know you understand the gravity of this situation. We're not just talking about career consequences here. We're talking about preventing mass hysteria over something we don't yet understand. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes. Paperwork, security protocols, scheduled interviews with psychological assessment teams. But my attention kept drifting to the way Jake's thumb traced small circles on the back of my hand, and to the certainty growing in my gut that we were already in far deeper than any of these people realized. When we finally left the conference room, Jake walked close beside me down the empty hallway. Tommy, he said quietly, you still have that external drive, right? What drive? I replied, loud enough for any listening devices to pick up. He smiled grimly. That's what I thought you'd say. We rode the elevator in silence, but when the doors opened on our floor, I could hear it. That rhythmic pulsing from the building's ventilation system, steady and patient as a sleeping heartbeat. The next 48 hours passed in suffocating normalcy. Jake and I returned to our regular duties, analyzing atmospheric data, processing routine deep field observations, pretending we'd never seen impossible structures or synchronized heartbeats. The external drive sat hidden in my apartment, encrypted and waiting. But the building itself seemed to remember. The ventilation system's rhythm had changed permanently, settling into that slow, measured pulse we'd first heard after the meeting. Colleagues complained of headaches, insomnia, dreams filled with geometric patterns. Dr. Rodriguez from the exoplanet team took medical leave after claiming his office walls were breathing. Maintenance reported that the facility's atomic clocks were running slow, not by much, but consistently, as if time itself were being stretched thin. Jake had grown distant. He still worked at the station next to mine, still shared coffee breaks and technical discussions, but something fundamental had shifted. He'd catch me looking at him and turn away, jaw tight with an anger I didn't understand. You're second-guessing this, I said during one of our increasingly rare private moments. We were alone in the break room, the fluorescent lights humming in harmony with the building's new pulse. Damn right I'm second-guessing it. Jake stirred his coffee with mechanical precision. You saw what happened in that meeting. These people aren't fucking around, Tommy. Morrison had the kind of smile that comes before people disappear. So we just let them bury the most significant discovery in human history. Maybe some discoveries are meant to stay buried. He set down his mug hard enough to slosh coffee across the table. You know what I keep thinking about? That eye. The way it looked at us. Not through the screen, but past it. Like it could see exactly where we were sitting. The break room's lights flickered, and for just a moment I could swear I saw that same geometric pattern flowing across the ceiling tiles. Jake noticed it too, his face going pale. It's getting worse, he whispered. The building, the people, everything, ever since we made contact. We didn't make contact. The government made contact. No, Tommy, we made contact the moment we looked at that thing and it looked back. His voice carried a desperation I'd never heard before. I've been tracking the physiological reports. Heart rate synchronization isn't the only symptom. People are developing retinal scarring in perfect geometric patterns. The security guards on night shift are reporting shared dreams, all the same dream, all of them seeing that ring structure rotating against stars that don't exist in our galaxy. Before I could respond, the break room door opened. Dr. Neil Hartman from the Stellar Dynamics team stumbled in, his usually immaculate shirt wrinkled, his grey hair disheveled. Neil was 63, a fixture at Goddard for 2 decades, the kind of steady, reliable scientist who never missed deadlines or lost his temper. "Tommy," he said, his voice thick and strange, "I need you to see something." Jake tensed beside me. "Neil, you look like hell. Maybe you should..." "I've been working on the Webb data." Neil's eyes had a glassy quality, pupils dilated despite the bright fluorescent lighting. "The real data, the stuff they told us to ignore." My stomach dropped. "Neil, that's classified. You shouldn't be..." "I found patterns," he continued, seeming not to hear me. "In the cosmic microwave background, subtle distortions that align with the ring structure's position. Do you understand what that means?" Jake stood slowly, placing himself between Neil and me. "Neil, you need to go home, get some sleep." "It means the structure isn't just sitting out there passively." Neil's voice rose, taking on a manic edge. "It's been actively modifying space-time for millennia, carving channels through reality itself. And those channels..." He laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "They lead here, to Earth, to us." The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the break room in hellish red. But in that moment of absolute darkness, the sound of breathing, deep and rhythmic, coming from the walls, the ceiling, the floor itself. Neil stood silhouetted against the emergency lighting, but something was wrong with his outline. His shadow stretched too far across the wall, and within that shadow, geometric patterns pulsed with faint bioluminescence. "Neil," Jake said carefully, "we need to get you to the medical bay." "I can see it now," Neil whispered, and his voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords shouldn't produce. "The true purpose. We thought we were observers, but we've always been the observed. Every telescope we've ever built, every signal we've ever sent into the dark, we've been announcing ourselves, calling out our location, our capabilities, our weaknesses." His head turned toward us with mechanical precision, and I saw that his eyes had changed. The irises were gone, replaced by perfect black circles that reflected depths I couldn't fathom. "The ring doesn't need to travel here," he continued, taking a step forward. "It's been here all along, watching through every instrument we've ever pointed at the sky. And now that we've finally seen it clearly, the connection is complete." Jake grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The magnetic lock had engaged, sealing us in. "Tommy," Neil said, and hearing my name in that distorted voice made my skin crawl. "You were the first to enhance the image resolution. You opened the channel wider. The structure is grateful." The geometric patterns in his shadow began to move, flowing like living circuits across the wall. Where they touched the emergency lighting, the bulbs flared brighter, then began to pulse in that same slow rhythm we'd been hearing throughout the building. "This is what Morrison was afraid of," Jake breathed. "Not the discovery itself, but the discovery discovering us back." Neil's form began to blur at the edges, as if reality were having trouble maintaining his coherence. "The transformation isn't painful," he said, his voice now coming from multiple directions at once. "It's like finally understanding a language you've been hearing your entire life." I backed against the wall, feeling Jake pressed close beside me, his rapid breathing hot against my neck. "Neil, fight this. Whatever's happening to you, fight it." Why would I fight ascension? The thing that had been Neil tilted its head, and I heard the vertebrae crack in a sequence that sounded almost like Morse code. The ring structure exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Human consciousness is so limited, so linear, but it doesn't have to be. The emergency lights began strobing faster, and with each flash, Neil's form seemed to shift slightly, now standing normally, now stretched impossibly tall, now multiple overlapping versions of himself occupying the same space. Jake's hand found mine, gripping tight. "Tommy, the external drive. Does it contain any enhanced images? Any high-resolution shots of the structure?" "Several. Why?" "Because I think the image enhancement process creates a stronger connection, a wider bandwidth." Jake's voice was barely audible over the increasingly erratic pulse of the lights. "Every time we've looked at detailed images of that thing, we've been inviting it deeper into our reality." The thing that had been Neil laughed, a sound like crystal breaking in reverse. "Such a clever boy. Yes, the connection strengthens with observation, with understanding, with desire to know more." Its head rotated too far, owl-like, impossible. "And you, Tommy Wakeford, desire to know so very much." The walls began to breathe visibly now, expanding and contracting in rhythm with that omnipresent pulse. The break room's geometry seemed to shift, corners stretching into acute angles, the ceiling pressing down like a closing mouth. "We need to destroy the drive," Jake said urgently. "All of it. Every enhanced image. Every analysis file." But even as he spoke, I knew it was too late. The damage was done. Whatever we'd awakened with our observations was already here, already changing the fundamental nature of our reality. Neil's transformation was just the beginning. The emergency lights died, plunging us into absolute darkness. In that blackness, I heard Jake's sharp intake of breath, felt his grip on my hand tighten, and realized with growing horror that the breathing sounds were no longer coming from the walls. They were coming from him. The breathing was Jake having a panic attack. Emergency power restored 30 seconds later, revealing him hunched against the wall, hyperventilating into his cupped hands while Neil's transformed remains flickered in and out of existence like a badly tuned television signal. Whatever had taken our colleague was gone now, leaving only geometric scorch marks on the linoleum and the lingering smell of ozone. "Jesus Christ, Tommy, I thought I was changing too." Jake's voice came in ragged gasps. "When the lights went out, I could feel something crawling inside my head, like insects made of static." I knelt beside him, checking his pupils with my phone's flashlight. Normal dilation, normal response, no geometric scarring on his retinas. "You're okay. You're still you." "For now." He pushed himself upright, legs shaky but functional. "But what happened to Neil? That's going to happen to more people, isn't it?" Before I could answer, the break room door clicked open. Agent Morrison stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards in hazmat gear. His pale eyes surveyed the scorch marks with professional detachment. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "we need to talk." The debriefing took place in a sterile conference room 3 floors underground, in a section of Goddard I didn't know existed. Morrison sat across from us while Colonel Briggs worked at a tablet, occasionally showing us images that made my head throb just looking at them. "Dr. Hartman's transformation began 18 hours ago," Morrison explained. He'd been accessing classified files, running unauthorized analyses on the Webb data. Each enhanced image he processed strengthened what we're calling the observation effect. "The what now?" Jake asked, pressing an ice pack against his temple. "Think of it as quantum entanglement on a consciousness level," Colonel Briggs replied. "The act of observing the structure creates a bidirectional link. The more detail you perceive, the more it can perceive you." Morrison leaned forward. "Dr. Wakeford, you were the first to enhance the original images. Mr. Brennan, you've been analyzing spectral data for days. Both of you are exhibiting early-stage symptoms. Synchronized cardiac rhythms, shared sensory experiences, mild reality distortion." "Define mild," I said. "The building's ventilation system isn't actually producing those sounds you've been hearing. The geometric patterns in shadows and reflections aren't visible to unaffected personnel. Your brains are being gradually prepared for deeper integration." The word integration hit me like a physical blow. "Integration into what?" Colonel Briggs turned his tablet toward us. The screen showed a star map with red dots scattered across several solar systems. 3 months ago, we detected similar structures in 17 different sectors. Always beyond nebulae, always in regions where enhanced telescopic observation was most likely. Each discovery triggered the same sequence: initial contact, consciousness bridging, then rapid transformation of exposed personnel. Other facilities? Jake asked. Mauna Kea Observatory, the very large telescope in Chile, Arecibo before its collapse, which, by the way, wasn't structural failure. The radio telescope array at Jodrell Bank. Each site reported identical phenomena before going dark. Morrison pulled up another file. The pattern is consistent. First contact occurs when detailed observations are made. The structure responds by establishing psychic links with key personnel. Those links gradually expand until a critical mass is reached, usually around 40 to 50 transformed individuals. Then reality breakdown begins. Reality breakdown? Localized space-time distortion. Gravity wells form spontaneously. Electromagnetic radiation begins behaving according to physics that shouldn't exist. Eventually, the entire facility becomes a bridgehead, a foothold allowing the structures to extend their influence into our dimensional framework. How many people at Goddard have been exposed to the enhanced images? Colonel Briggs consulted his tablet. Based on access logs and security footage, approximately 237 staff members have viewed high-resolution imagery of the structure. Of those, 43 are showing measurable symptoms. And Neil makes 44, Jake said quietly. Neil Hartman no longer exists in any meaningful sense, Morrison replied. What you encountered was a consciousness template, a hollow shell animated by the structure's expanding influence. But yes, his transformation brings us dangerously close to critical mass. The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning. Normal air conditioning, I realized. The rhythmic pulse was gone down here. There's something else, Colonel Briggs continued. The transmission we received 3 weeks ago. It wasn't a greeting or a threat. It was a warning. Jake and I exchanged glances. A warning about what? The ring structures aren't the primary intelligence. They're escape pods. Morrison's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 47,000 years ago, something consumed the civilization that built them. The rings are all that's left, automated systems designed to find suitable host species and prepare them for what's coming. Prepare them how? By creating dimensional bridges, by transforming local reality into something compatible with the primary intelligence's physics. Colonel Briggs showed us another image, a deep space photograph that made my eyes water to look at. This is what Webb detected in the void behind the Karina Nebula. It's been there all along, waiting for the rings to do their work. The image resolved into something that shouldn't have been possible, a structure so vast it dwarfed entire star systems, its surface covered in the same geometric patterns we'd seen flowing through Neil's shadow. But this wasn't just big. It was wrong, existing in too many dimensions at once, casting shadows that fell upward into empty space. How long do we have? I asked. Based on the progression rate at other facilities, 72 hours until critical mass transformation. After that, Goddard becomes a permanent gateway. Morrison closed his laptop with finality. The decision has been made to evacuate all non-essential personnel and implement containment protocols. Containment protocols? Colonel Briggs met my eyes. Tactical nuclear sterilization of the entire complex. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're going to nuke us. We're going to prevent a dimensional incursion that could spread across the entire eastern seaboard, Morrison corrected, unless you have a better idea. I thought about the external drive in my apartment, filled with terabytes of enhanced imagery, about the spreading influence, the transformed personnel, the countdown to something unimaginable breaking through into our reality. About Jake sitting beside me, his hand finding mine under the table, both of us balanced on the edge of becoming something inhuman. Actually, I said, I might. Morrison raised an eyebrow. The structure responds to observation, right? The more detailed our images, the stronger the connection becomes. But what if we reverse that? What if instead of enhancing the images, we corrupted them? Explain. Every digital image has metadata, compression artifacts, processing algorithms. If the connection depends on accurate observation, then systematically degrading the visual data might sever the link, or at least weaken it enough to slow the transformation process. Colonel Briggs frowned. You're talking about introducing errors into the most sophisticated imaging equipment ever built. I'm talking about controlled sabotage of the Webb telescope's data processing systems, I corrected. Make it impossible to generate clear images of the structure. Force the connection to degrade naturally. That's... Morrison paused, considering. Dangerously close to treason. The Webb telescope represents billions in taxpayer funding. Jake squeezed my hand. Better than a nuclear crater in Maryland. The silence stretched out while Morrison and Briggs weighed our proposal against genocide. Finally, Morrison nodded. 72 hours, he said. If your plan doesn't work, we implement containment protocols. No exceptions. As we left the underground conference room, Jake walked close beside me. Tommy, he said quietly, you realize we just volunteered for a suicide mission, right? Better than the alternative. Is it? Because something tells me that once we start fucking with Webb's systems, we're going to attract a lot more attention from that thing. And I'm not sure either of us is strong enough to resist what Neil couldn't. I thought about that as we rode the elevator back to ground level, listening to the building's normal sounds, breathing air that didn't pulse with alien rhythms. Jake was right, of course, but looking at him, stubbled, exhausted, beautiful in the harsh fluorescent light, I realized I'd rather face transformation with him than face safety alone. 72 hours to save the world, or die trying. The Webb telescope's primary data processing center occupied an entire floor of Goddard's East Wing, a cathedral of servers and cooling systems that hummed with the constant flow of information from space. At 3:17 a.m., Jake and I stood before the main console, our security badges having gotten us past 3 checkpoints and a sleepy guard who didn't question our story about emergency calibration procedures. You sure about this? Jake asked, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Dark circles under his eyes made him look older, more fragile somehow. Once we start introducing corruption algorithms into the imaging pipeline, there's no going back. Morrison gave us 72 hours. We've already burned 18 of them. I connected the external drive to the system, watching as terabytes of corrupted data samples loaded into the processing queue. Besides, what's the alternative? Let that thing turn us all into geometric shadows. Jake began typing, his movements precise despite the tremor in his hands. I've been thinking about what Colonel Briggs said, about consciousness bridging. If the structure can influence people through enhanced images, what happens when we start actively degrading its connection? The first corruption protocol initialized, introducing random pixel displacement into the incoming data stream. On the monitor, the ring structure's image began to fracture, its perfect geometric patterns dissolving into static. Maybe it gets pissed off, I said. The building's lights flickered. Shit. Jake's typing accelerated, implementing cascade corruption across multiple data channels. It's responding faster than expected. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Our breath began to mist, and frost started forming on the server racks. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the parking lot's sodium lights begin to pulse in that familiar slow rhythm. Keep going, I urged, moving closer to Jake's workstation. Close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body in the sudden cold, to catch his scent. Soap and nervous sweat and something else. Something that made my pulse quicken despite our circumstances. Corruption Protocol 2 activating. His shoulder pressed against mine as he reached for a different keyboard. The contact sent electricity up my arm, and for a moment I forgot about alien structures and dimensional incursions, focused only on the warmth of his skin through his shirt. The Webb data stream began displaying impossible images. Stars arranged in perfect spirals, nebulae that folded in on themselves, galaxies that spelled out mathematical equations in languages that hadn't been invented yet. Then the corruption took hold and the images dissolved into beautiful chaos. It's working, Jake breathed. Look at the signal strength readings. The connection indicators were dropping steadily, green to yellow to amber. The structure's influence was weakening, its ability to project itself through the data stream compromised by our systematic sabotage. That's when the betrayal began. "Actually," said a voice from behind us, "it's not working at all." We turned to find Dr. Hoffman standing in the doorway, but something was fundamentally wrong with his appearance. His shadow stretched too far across the floor, and within that darkness, geometric patterns pulsed with faint bioluminescence, the same patterns we'd seen in Neil's transformation. "Jesus Christ, Hoffman." Jake stepped in front of me, protective instincts overriding caution. "How long?" "Since yesterday morning." Hoffman's voice carried those impossible harmonics we'd heard before. "The structure doesn't just influence through enhanced images. It influences through understanding, through knowledge of its existence. And you two have been learning about it longer than anyone. The corruption protocols were still running, but now I could see their true purpose. Instead of weakening the structure's connection, we'd been strengthening it. Every attempt to degrade the data had provided the intelligence behind the ring with new pathways, new methods of integration. "You fucking set us up," Jake snarled. "The structure set you up." Hoffman moved into the room with mechanical precision. "It's been guiding your thoughts since you first enhanced that image. Every decision you've made, every plan you've conceived has served its purpose." The servers around us began to emit sounds, not mechanical hums, but something organic, breathing. The cooling system's airflow matched the rhythm, creating a chorus of inhalation and exhalation that filled the space with alien intention. "The corruption algorithms you're implementing aren't random," Hoffman continued. "They're following specific patterns, sacred geometries that exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously. You're not sabotaging the connection, you're completing it." I looked at the monitoring displays with growing horror. The signal strength wasn't dropping, it was transforming. The green indicators had shifted to colors that didn't belong in any normal spectrum, hues that made my eyes water and my brain struggle to process them. "Jake," I said urgently, "we need to shut this down. All of it." But when I turned to him, I saw that we were already too late. Jake's pupils had begun to dilate, not with fear or shock, but with the same geometric expansion we'd seen in Neil and Hoffman. The patterns were faint still, barely visible, but growing stronger with each pulse of the corrupted data stream. "I can see it now," he whispered, his voice taking on subtle harmonics. "The true structure, not just the ring, but everything behind it. Tommy, it's beautiful. It's so much more than we ever imagined. Fight it." I grabbed his shoulders, feeling the heat of his skin through his shirt, the solid reality of his body even as his consciousness began to slip away. "Jake, you have to fight this." "Why would I fight revelation?" He smiled, and for a moment, he was still completely human, beautiful, stubborn, brilliant Jake. Then the smile widened beyond anatomical possibility, corners stretching toward his ears. "The structure isn't destroying us, it's elevating us, making us part of something infinite." The temperature continued to drop, but now I could see that the cold wasn't coming from the air conditioning. It was radiating from Jake himself, from the growing geometric patterns in his eyes, from the shadows that were beginning to detach from his body and move independently across the walls. "The connection is almost complete," Hoffman announced from somewhere behind me. 46 transformed individuals, critical mass approaches. I looked at the main console, at the corruption algorithms still running their predetermined course. Every line of code Jake had written was perfectly designed to establish deeper integration with the ring structure. We'd been manipulated from the beginning, our expertise turned against us with surgical precision. "There's one way to stop this," I realized. "No," Jake said, and his voice was no longer entirely his own. Multiple tones, multiple intentions layered into a single word. "You cannot break what has already become whole." I reached for the manual cutoff switch, a physical breaker that would shut down all power to the Webb processing systems. But as my hand approached the lever, Jake grabbed my wrist with inhuman strength. "Please don't make me hurt you," he said, and I could hear the real Jake underneath the alien harmonics, still fighting for control. "Tommy, I can feel it changing me, and part of me doesn't want it to stop." "Then let me stop it for you." I kissed him. The contact was electric, not metaphorically, but literally. Energy arced between our lips, and for one perfect moment I could see through his eyes, could perceive the ring structure as it truly existed across 17 dimensions, could understand the vast intelligence that waited behind the Karina Nebula for reality to be reshaped in its image. But I could also feel Jake's consciousness, still human, still fighting, still mine. The geometric patterns in his pupils flickered, wavered, began to fade. "Now," I whispered against his lips. Together we threw the manual cutoff. The Webb processing systems died instantly, plunging the floor into darkness. The servers fell silent. The breathing sounds stopped. The temperature began to rise as normal air conditioning resumed. But the victory was Pyrrhic. Through the windows, I could see the parking lot light still pulsing in that alien rhythm. The structure's influence had spread beyond our data systems, into the building's infrastructure, into the electrical grid itself. And Jake collapsed against me, unconscious but breathing, his pupils slowly returning to normal human dimensions. "Interesting," Hoffman said from the darkness. "The emotional connection proved stronger than the dimensional bridging. Unexpected, but not insurmountable." Emergency lighting flickered on, revealing that Hoffman was no longer alone. 6 more transformed figures stood behind him. Colleagues I recognized, their faces serene and their shadows moving independently of their bodies. "The connection will re-establish," Hoffman continued. "The corruption protocols have served their purpose. The bridgehead is stable now, independent of the Webb telescope systems." I held Jake's unconscious form, feeling his heartbeat gradually synchronize with something vast and patient. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over Goddard Space Flight Center, but the light coming through the windows was wrong. Too angular, too geometric, casting shadows that fell upward. 47 transformed individuals, Hoffman announced. Critical mass achieved. The floor began to vibrate, not with mechanical resonance, but with the rhythm of something immense taking its first breath in our reality. I had saved Jake's humanity, but I had doomed everything else. The dimensional incursion was beginning. The emergency stairwell was the only part of Goddard that still felt normal. Concrete walls, fluorescent fixtures that didn't pulse with alien rhythms, air that moved according to terrestrial physics. I carried Jake down 7 flights, his unconscious weight solid and warm against my shoulder, while behind us the building itself began to breathe with increasing intensity. We reached sub-level 3, the secure storage area where backup servers hummed quietly in climate-controlled isolation. I set Jake down on a maintenance bench, checking his pulse, his pupils, the temperature of his skin. Still human. Still mine. For now. While he slept, I allowed myself to remember the last time I'd felt this kind of desperate protectiveness. My younger brother Michael, 15 years old and dying of leukemia in a sterile hospital room in Baltimore. I'd sat beside his bed for 3 days straight, holding his hand, watching machines track his failing vital signs, knowing that all my intelligence and education meant nothing against the simple, brutal mathematics of cellular destruction. Michael had died on a Tuesday morning while I was getting coffee from the hospital cafeteria. By the time I returned, he was gone, and the guilt of not being there for his final breath had followed me for 12 years. It's why I dedicated my life to studying the distant universe. Easier to contemplate the deaths of stars than the death of someone you couldn't save. But Jake wasn't dying. Jake was being transformed into something that might be better than human, and I was fighting that transformation with every tool at my disposal because I couldn't bear to lose another person to forces beyond my control. "Tommy." His voice was hoarse but recognizably his own. The geometric patterns in his pupils had faded to barely perceptible traces. "Hey." I knelt beside the bench, smoothing sweaty hair from his forehead. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been electrocuted by God." He struggled to sit up, grimacing. "The connection. I can still feel it, but it's weaker down here, like trying to hear a radio station that's almost out of range. The structure's influence seems to be concentrated in the upper levels, where the Webb processing systems are located." Jake nodded, then stopped abruptly. "Christ, Tommy, I could have killed you. When I grabbed your wrist, I could feel this hunger, this need to make you understand what I was seeing. But you didn't. You fought it. Barely." He stood unsteadily, leaning against the wall for support. How many others have been transformed? 47, according to Hoffman. Critical mass. Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Then, we're fucked, aren't we? Maybe not. I moved to one of the backup servers, powering up a terminal that hadn't been connected to the corrupted Webb data stream. I've been thinking about what Morrison said. The structures are escape pods from a dead civilization, preparing our reality for something bigger. But they're still just machines, even if they're impossibly advanced ones. So machines can be hacked. I pulled up the facility's network architecture, mapping the connections between systems, looking for vulnerabilities. The structure has been using our own technology against us. Telescopes, data processing systems, even the building's electrical grid. But every connection works both ways. Jake moved closer, studying the network diagrams over my shoulder. His proximity was comforting and distracting in equal measure. You want to send a virus back through the connection? Not a virus, a feedback loop. I highlighted several key nodes in the network. The structure processes information through our systems to maintain its dimensional bridgehead. If we can overload those systems with recursive data loops, force it to process infinite complexity, we might be able to crash the connection entirely. That's, Jake paused, considering, actually brilliant, but it would require direct access to the main server core, which is currently occupied by 47 transformed colleagues who really don't want us to interfere with their cosmic awakening. I know. I turned to face him fully. That's why I need you to do something for me. Anything. The word hung between us, loaded with possibilities we'd never had time to explore. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the external drive, the repository of all our original discoveries, our first detailed images of the ring structure. I need you to take this to Morrison, get him to evacuate the remaining unaffected personnel, then implement the nuclear option. Jake stared at the drive as if it were a live snake. Tommy, no, we can make the feedback loop work. We don't need to... Look at me. I waited until his eyes met mine. The geometric patterns in your pupils haven't disappeared entirely. They're still there, just dormant. Every minute you spend near the structure's influence, they get stronger. He touched his face unconsciously. I can fight it. For how long? And what happens when you can't? I pressed the drive into his palm, closing his fingers around it. I won't watch you become something else. I can't. The terminal behind me chimed with an incoming message. Morrison's face appeared on screen, his usual composure cracked by exhaustion and fear. Dr. Wakeford, if you're receiving this, respond immediately. The transformation rate has accelerated beyond our projections. We're implementing containment protocols in 60 minutes. Jake and I stared at each other, an hour until nuclear sterilization. Morrison, I said to the screen, we have a potential solution, but we need more time. Time is the one resource we don't have. Satellite imagery shows reality distortion extending beyond the facility perimeter. Whatever's happening at Goddard is affecting the surrounding area. Gravity fluctuations, electromagnetic anomalies, reports of impossible architecture appearing in downtown Greenbelt. The weight of that revelation settled over us. The dimensional incursion wasn't contained to our building. It was spreading. 60 minutes, Morrison continued. Then we glass the entire complex and hope that's enough to prevent further expansion. The transmission cut out, leaving us in silence broken only by the hum of servers and the distant sound of something massive stirring in the levels above us. All right, Jake said quietly. What's the real plan? I called up the feedback loop algorithms I'd been developing, complex recursive functions designed to create infinite processing demands. I upload these directly to the main server core, overloading the structure's dimensional bridgehead. The connection crashes, the transformed personnel revert to normal, and we all live happily ever after. And the catch? The upload has to be initiated from the primary console in the Webb Processing Center, the same room where 47 transformed colleagues are currently standing guard. Jake studied the algorithms, his programmer's mind quickly grasping their elegant brutality. These will work, but the processing demands, Tommy, this won't just crash the structure's connection. It'll fry every system in the building, including life support, security protocols, radiation shielding for the nuclear reactor. I know. You'll die in there. Probably. He grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to meet his eyes. Then I'm coming with you. No. Someone needs to get the drive to Morrison. Make sure the nuclear option stays on the table if this doesn't work. I kissed him again, tasting fear and desperation, and something deeper. Besides, one of us should survive to remember what we tried to do here. Tommy, the geometric patterns are still in your eyes, Jake. Faint, but there. If you come with me into the heart of the structure's influence, you'll transform completely. And I can't save the world with you whispering alien mathematics in my ear. He was quiet for a long moment, thumb tracing the edge of my jaw. You're asking me to abandon you. I'm asking you to trust me. The building shuddered around us, concrete groaning as impossible forces pressed against the foundations of reality. Time was running out. Jake pocketed the external drive, his face set with grim determination. How long do you need? 10 minutes to reach the processing center, 5 minutes to upload the algorithms, maybe 30 seconds to watch the fireworks. I'll get Morrison to delay the nuclear strike for 20 minutes. That's all I can promise. It's enough. We stood together in the humming silence of the server room, two humans balanced on the edge of saving or damning their species. Above us, transformed colleagues waited with inhuman patience. Behind us, military forces prepared to reduce everything we'd ever known to radioactive glass. For what it's worth, Jake said softly, I'm glad we found each other before the end of the world. The world's not ending, I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. It's just changing into something we won't recognize. He kissed me one last time, fierce and desperate, then headed for the stairwell. 20 minutes, Tommy. Don't be late. I watched him go, memorizing the set of his shoulders, the sound of his footsteps on concrete stairs. Then I turned back to the terminal and began preparing for either humanity's salvation or my own spectacular failure. The countdown had begun. The elevator to the Webb processing floor had become a vertical throat lined with breathing metal. As I rose through the building's transformed anatomy, geometric patterns flowed along the walls like luminescent bloodstreams, pulsing in rhythm with something vast and patient somewhere beyond the edge of space. 20 minutes until nuclear sterilization, 15 minutes since Jake had left with the external drive. The elevator doors opened onto a landscape that belonged in someone else's nightmare. The processing center had expanded beyond its original dimensions, walls stretching into impossible distances while somehow still fitting within the building's footprint. The server racks breathed in unison, their cooling fans replaced by organic apertures that inhaled data and exhaled reality distortion. The 47 transformed colleagues stood motionless throughout the space, their faces serene, their shadows moving independently across surfaces that existed in too many dimensions at once. At the center of it all, the main console had become something between machine and altar. Cables grew from it like neural pathways, connecting to points on the floor, the ceiling, the air itself. Dr. Hoffman stood beside it, his form flickering between human and something more geometric, more perfect. Dr. Wakeford, he said, his voice layering harmonics that made my teeth ache despite the banned phrase restriction I was trying to follow. We've been expecting you. I walked forward, each step requiring conscious effort as the floor tried to reshape itself around my feet. The feedback loop algorithms were loaded on the portable drive in my pocket, ready to upload the moment I could reach the console. The nuclear strike won't stop this, I said, buying time while I assessed the room's new geometry. Even if they glass the entire facility, you've already established bridgeheads in other locations. 17 other facilities to be precise, Hoffman replied. Each one a doorway, each doorway opening wider. He gestured to the transformed colleagues around us. These individuals are no longer bound by linear causality. They exist simultaneously across multiple dimensional frameworks, serving as anchors for something far grander than human civilization. The nearest transformed figure, Dr. Rodriguez from Exoplanets, turned toward me with mechanical precision. Her eyes had become perfect black spheres that reflected stars from galaxies that didn't exist in our universe. "The structure isn't malevolent," she said in Rodriguez's voice layered with alien harmonics. "It's preservation. When the primary intelligence arrives, it will need suitable consciousness templates to inhabit. We are becoming those templates." I took another step toward the console, 12 feet away. The cables connecting it to reality itself pulsed with increasing intensity. "What happened to the civilization that built the ring structures?" I asked. "They became part of something larger," Hoffman replied. "As will you. The resistance you're planning, the feedback loop algorithms designed to overload our dimensional bridgehead, we've been aware of your preparations since you conceived them." "Then why let me get this far?" "Because the algorithms will work exactly as designed. They will overload the processing systems, crash the immediate connection, and prevent the bridgehead from stabilizing." Hoffman smiled, and his teeth were geometric shapes that hurt to perceive directly. "But they will also create a massive energy discharge that will simultaneously destroy this facility and signal our coordinates to every ring structure in this galactic arm. The trap was perfect. Save the immediate situation and doom the entire planet. Do nothing and watch humanity transform into consciousness templates for an intelligence that devoured civilizations." 8 feet from the console now. The transformed colleagues around me began to move, not aggressively, but with the patient convergence of antibodies responding to infection. I thought about Jake, hopefully clear of the blast radius by now, about my brother Michael, who'd never had the chance to make impossible choices, about the external drive containing all our discoveries, evidence of humanity's brief moment of cosmic awareness before everything changed forever. "There is a third option," Rodriguez said, her impossible eyes reflecting depths that made my vision blur. "Join the transformation willingly. Become part of the bridgehead instead of fighting it. Your consciousness would be preserved, elevated, integrated into something infinite." "Tommy," added another voice. Neil, the first to transform, though his physical form had long since dissolved into animate shadow. "The loneliness ends. The fear ends. You become part of a community that spans galaxies." 4 feet from the console. The cables were reaching toward me now, seeking connection points on my skin, my neural pathways, the electromagnetic field of my beating heart. I could feel the pull of it, the promise of transcendence, of belonging to something larger than the small, desperate life of one human scientist on a dying planet. The structure's influence was seductive, offering solutions to every existential terror I'd carried since childhood. But then I remembered Jake's kiss, the electric moment when our consciousness had briefly touched, and I'd seen the ring structure as it truly existed across 17 dimensions. In that instant of perfect connection, I'd also seen what the transformed personnel had lost. Not just their humanity, but their individuality. They'd become nodes in a vast network, their unique perspectives dissolved into cosmic unity. Beautiful, perfect, and utterly without the messy, chaotic, gloriously imperfect love that made existence bearable. 2 feet from the console, the cables lunged toward me with serpentine hunger. I dodged left, rolling across the breathing floor while pulling the portable drive from my pocket. The transformed colleagues moved to intercept, but their coordination was too perfect, too predictable. They moved like components of a machine rather than individuals making split-second decisions. I came up beside the console's input port, thumb hovering over the drive's activation button. "Final choice, Dr. Wakeford," Hoffman said. "Upload your algorithms and destroy this facility while signaling our location to 17 other ring structures. Or join us willingly and help guide humanity's transformation into something greater." "Or," I said, "option 3. I pressed the activation button, but instead of uploading the feedback loops, I uploaded something else entirely. A virus Jake and I had developed during our late-night conspiracy sessions, designed not to overload the alien systems but to introduce chaos into their perfect order. Random number generators, paradox loops, algorithms designed to generate true randomness in a universe governed by deterministic physics. Every calculation the structure attempted would be contaminated by unpredictability. Every pattern it tried to establish undermined by variables that couldn't be controlled or predicted. The effect was immediate and devastating. The transformed colleagues began glitching, their perfect synchronization disrupted by cascading computational errors. Reality itself flickered around us as the structure's dimensional bridgehead tried to process infinite randomness and failed catastrophically. Hoffman's form began to dissolve, his geometric perfection corrupted by chaotic data streams. "You don't understand," he said, his voice fragmenting into multiple tones. "You're not saving them. You're trapping them between dimensions. They'll exist in a state of permanent transformation, never fully human, never fully integrated." I looked around at the transformed colleagues as the chaos virus spread through their shared consciousness. Their faces showed confusion, fear, recognition, human emotions returning in fractured glimpses as their alien integration collapsed and rebuilt and collapsed again in endless loops. They were alive, but they would never be entirely human again. "Sometimes," I said, watching reality fracture around us, "the best choice is the one that saves everyone and damns no one completely." The building began to shake as fundamental forces destabilized. Through the windows, I could see the parking lot lights returning to normal patterns, the geometric shadows retracting, the dimensional distortion collapsing in on itself. But the nuclear strike was still coming. 15 minutes and counting. The console exploded in a shower of sparks and impossible colors. The virus had done its work. The bridgehead was corrupted beyond repair. The transformation process locked in permanent feedback loops that would prevent either full integration or complete reversion. I had saved humanity from absorption into an alien consciousness. I had also condemned 47 colleagues to eternal existence as something between human and other. As the building collapsed around me and reality reasserted its terrestrial physics, I found myself oddly at peace. The choice had been impossible, but I'd made it anyway, accepting responsibility for both salvation and damnation. The ceiling cracked, raining concrete and twisted metal. I thought about Jake, safely away from the blast zone, carrying the evidence of what we'd discovered and what we'd sacrificed to contain it. The last thing I saw before the rubble buried me was a single cable, disconnected from everything, reaching toward empty air as if grasping for a connection that would never come. The loneliness, as Neil had promised, was ending. Just not in the way anyone had expected. Jake Brennan stood in the visitors' parking lot of the Shepard Pratt Institute, watching rain streak down his windshield while gathering courage for his monthly pilgrimage. 3 years had passed since the Goddard incident, officially classified as a catastrophic reactor malfunction that had claimed 48 lives and necessitated the facility's complete demolition. The official story was precise, sanitized, and utterly false. Through his windshield, he could see the Institute's eastern wing, where 47 former colleagues lived in a state the doctors diplomatically called persistent altered consciousness. They were alive, technically. Their bodies functioned normally, their basic cognitive processes intact. But their minds existed partially elsewhere, caught in an endless loop between human awareness and something vast and geometric. Jake entered through the security checkpoint, nodding to guards who'd grown familiar with his face over the years. Dr. Sarah Mitchell met him in the lobby, a kind woman in her 50s who specialized in what the medical community had started calling dimensional displacement syndrome. "How are they today?" Jake asked as they walked toward the secure ward. "Rodriguez has been drawing again, the same patterns but more complex than last month. Hoffman asked for you specifically. He's having one of his clearer periods." The ward resembled a comfortable hotel more than a medical facility, designed to house patients whose conditions defied conventional treatment. Jake passed room after room of former colleagues, some sitting quietly by windows. Others engaged in activities that looked normal until you noticed the geometric precision of their movements. He found Dr. Hoffman in the common area, assembling a jigsaw puzzle. The image was innocuous enough, a sunset over mountains. But Hoffman was placing pieces according to mathematical principles that created impossible spatial relationships. The finished sections hurt to look at directly. "Jake." Hoffman looked up with eyes that flickered between human recognition and alien awareness. "You came. I always come." Jake sat across from him, studying his former supervisor's face. The geometric scarring in his retinas had stabilized, creating permanent kaleidoscope patterns that shifted when he blinked. "How do you feel?" Divided, Hoffman replied simply. Part of me remembers being human. Part of me remembers being something else. They exist simultaneously now, like radio stations broadcasting on the same frequency. Do you remember Tommy? Hoffman's hand stilled on the puzzle pieces. He saved us, and he damned us. We should thank him for both. He selected another piece with mechanical precision. The bridge still exists, you know, damaged, corrupted, but not entirely severed. Sometimes, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, I can feel it trying to repair itself. Jake felt his pulse quicken. Repair itself how? New connections. Other observers looking too deeply into places they shouldn't. The James Webb telescope was destroyed, but humans are curious creatures. They'll build new instruments, point them at the same coordinates, enhance the same images. Hoffman placed the final piece of the puzzle, completing an image that now depicted something that definitely wasn't mountains or sunset. The ring structure is patient. It can wait for the next opportunity. After leaving the institute, Jake drove to his apartment in Tacoma Park, where the external drive sat in a safety deposit box, its contents still classified beyond any clearance level he'd ever held. Morrison had vanished into the bureaucratic maze shortly after the incident, and Colonel Briggs had died of a heart attack, officially natural causes, though witnesses reported that his final EKG readout showed geometric patterns instead of normal cardiac rhythms. Jake poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and settled into his chair by the window. Outside, streetlights cast normal shadows, and the night sounds of suburban Maryland carried no alien harmonics. But on his desk, the small digital clock he'd owned for 15 years displayed the time in numbers that occasionally shifted into patterns he recognized from corrupted web data. The clock had been nowhere near Goddard during the incident, had never been connected to any network that might carry contamination. Yet every night at exactly 3:47 a.m., it briefly showed symbols that belonged to a dead civilization from beyond the Karina Nebula. Jake finished his whiskey and tried not to think about how 47 other clocks, scattered across the homes of the Institute's patients, probably displayed the same impossible readouts at the same impossible time. The connection was damaged, corrupted, reduced to fragments. But it was learning to rebuild itself, one small miracle of impossible physics at a time.